My experience at Karetnikov Pass. I hadn't thought about that trip in years. 16 years to be exact. Maybe it would have disappeared into the fold of time if I hadn't read that damn post. Karetnikov Pass is real. I know that now for sure. What follows is the story of me and my best friend's trip there in the spring of 2008. I want everyone to remember we were kids. We might have legally been adults, but we were just a pair of dumb kids looking for a fun way to kick off summer break. We had graduated a couple weeks earlier and knew this would be our last summer before real life kicked in, before college loans made summer jobs a necessity, before we ended up with responsibilities. If you were an adult back then, or an observant kid, you probably remembered the economy was in the hole, so we didn't have much money between the two of us, and our parents were pretty strapped for cash as well. The only thing that was affordable at the time was gas. Not that it stayed that way, but at the time of our planning, we could fill up Jimmy's Jeep for $20 and drive for hours. So, we settled on a road trip. We had a destination in mind, but would pick the route as we went. It was going to be glorious, a full 3 weeks of independence. We printed out some MapQuest routes to landmarks we wanted to see and hit the road. I'll spare you the boring details of our trip. It went like you would imagine it would. Lots of stolen alcohol, reckless driving, and failed attempts to woo local girls. The day things changed forever started like all the rest. Jimmy groaned in pain as our bodies punished us for the abuse we put it through the night before. We had slept on the side of some back road. At least I had. Jimmy fell asleep before he even got out of the driver's seat. It was a miracle he managed to set the parking brake. I shielded my eyes from the glaring sun. Bro, where are we? Jimmy retched over the side of his Jeep. Thankfully, the top was off. Unfortunately, I didn't remember even taking the top off, or when it had come off. Jimmy grimaced. He looked longingly at the empty water bottle in the cup holder. I don't know, man, but I'm drier than the Sahara Desert. That's what she said. Jimmy chuckled. I climbed into the Jeep, and Jimmy turned the key. Nothing happened. Not even a click. I pointed at the headlight switch. You left the lights on, dumbass. Jimmy dropped his head to the steering wheel. Okay, whose turn is it? I tried to remember, but couldn't. Since neither of us knew, we did rock, paper, scissors, which I lost. Grumbling about the unfairness of it, I got back out of the Jeep. Jimmy popped the parking brake and I started pushing. Once we had it running, we tore off, kicking up an absurd amount of dust. A couple miles along, Jimmy slowed. There was a sign at the crossroad. It read, Karetnikov Pass, 3 miles, and had an arrow. Jimmy glanced at me, and I nodded, excited at the prospect of finding another place to party. Soon we crested the last hill before reaching the town. Below us was a small gathering of houses and assorted buildings. Beyond the town, glistening in the midday heat, sat a lake surrounded by rocky hills and scattered trees. Disappointment rose up in me as we drove through town. It looked old. Not like it had been sitting for 100 years kind of old, but like people had spent a lot of time maintaining the original buildings kind of old. And unfortunately, it was totally empty. The shrubs growing out of the cracks in the road, along with the weathered wood of the buildings, made it clear no one had lived here for a while. There was a welcome sign of sorts. Time hadn't been gentle with it, and most of it was gone. What remained was a population number of 5. Clearly it had said more in the past, but the 5 was all that was left. Jimmy wanted to jump in the lake, so we drove recklessly through the empty streets, whooping as we narrowly missed signs and mailboxes. We got to the lake's edge. It was so pristine and blue. It made me want to leap right in, but I knew we were pretty high in elevation, and it likely looked so clear because it was fed by melting snow. I cautiously dipped my fingers in. I recoiled at the feeling. It almost felt like the water was vibrating, or tingling, as if charged with electricity. Hey, Jimmy, maybe we shouldn't. Jimmy's naked ass flew past me as he cannonballed right into the water. He screamed in surprise, and not like an ice water on the ball scream, but a scream of distress. In a panic, I ran into the water after him. He was flailing about wildly. The water was only waist deep, so I grabbed him and pulled him back to the beach. He shuddered and crawled a little further from the water. Thanks, dude. Something's wrong with that water. I was annoyed that his action had led me to get my shoes and pants all wet, but I was so relieved that he was okay. Yeah, let's leave the water to be. I saw a gas station when we pulled into town. Maybe it'll have some bottled water we can grab. Jimmy agreed. We knew the station was closed, but figured maybe there was something still there. The afternoon sun was getting hot, and my clothes were drying off pretty fast. By the time we got back to the station, only my shoes were still wet. Jimmy tried the door. It opened up with no resistance. Sweet, let's go inside, he said. I was about to follow when a sign on the door caught my eye. It was a weird set of town rules. 1. Curfew is from 9 p.m. until 8 a.m. Everything excluding emergency services are to be closed. No exceptions. 2. Emergency services are advised to lock their doors and cooperate with local law enforcement in case of emergencies. 3. If any citizen is found in the streets after curfew, they will be placed under arrest for the remainder of the night. 4. If you encounter anyone other than local law enforcement during curfew, do not physically engage. 5. Keep all your doors and windows locked during curfew. No exceptions. 6. Do not answer your door during curfew. Do not pay attention to anyone claiming to be in need of help or even a family member who claims to have lost their key. 7. If any of your relatives or loved ones are not home by curfew, inform local law enforcement via telephone. 8. If you cannot make it to your home in time for curfew, remain inside your vehicle or call local law enforcement. 9. If you cannot do the above, remain where you are. You will be found and taken into custody by local law enforcement. 10. Do not swim in the lake near the mountain. 11. Do not go into the mountain during curfew. 12. Do not leave town during curfew. Well, that would have been nice to know. Clearly the lake had something wrong with it. But the rest of the rules sounded really dumb. This place is empty. What kind of law enforcement could there be? And a curfew? I guess that made sense. Lots of campgrounds had curfews, and judging by the lack of graffiti, it seemed to be working. Jimmy came back out of the gas station. It's a bust, bro. Everything in there is either gross or spoiled. I nodded. So now what? Jimmy looked around the town. Now, my good sir, we explore this Jamestown until we procure proper sleeping quarters. I was a little skeptical. You really think we should poke around? Jimmy grabbed a bottle of something from under the Jeep's seat. Hell yeah, man. If everything goes to plan, we'll be bottles up in the mayor's house living like kings. He made a very appealing argument. We got back in the Jeep and headed through town. It didn't take long to find the most opulent house. We got settled in. We ended up pitching our tent in the living room, as all the furniture was covered with a couple years' worth of dust. We passed the bottle back and forth as the sun went down. Feeling courageous, Jimmy decided to go upstairs and check the place out. I followed after and found him rummaging through the master bedroom's dresser. He held up a pair of lacy lingerie. Dude, who leaves stuff like this behind? All the drawers are full. It's like they just walked away one day. I was feeling uneasy, which was no small task considering all the liquor I had sloshing around in my stomach. Put it back, man. Let's leave their stuff alone. It felt wrong, like we were defiling a grave. Seeing people's belongings made it feel less like a cool empty building to explore, and more like someone's home. Jimmy didn't argue with me, but neither did he go back downstairs. He pulled out his pocket flashlight as the sun had slid low in the sky. I followed him as he went room to room checking them out. I felt better now that he wasn't touching things, but I still didn't like being there. A knock on the front door caused Jimmy to let out a yipe. I jumped as well. I was just much quieter about it. Jimmy turned off his light. "Shit, man, you don't think there's cops here, do you?" I thought back to the set of rules at the gas station. It had mentioned law enforcement. I told Jimmy about it, and he swore again. "This isn't good, man. I've got a scholarship." I looked out the window to the empty street below. No park ranger or cop car was visible. The knocking came again. This time, more rapid and harder. We crouched down. I'm not sure why, as we were on the second floor. There was a break in the pounding. The silence dragged on until my legs began to burn from sitting in a squatted position. It must have been 10 minutes since the knocking had stopped. "Hey, Jimmy, I think they're gone. Let's get out of here while we can." Jimmy went down the steps first. When he got to the front door, he turned the deadbolt, locking it. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Whoever that was never announced themselves. I'm assuming it was other kids like us, or a bum, mad that we're crashing in his town." I thought about what he said. Okay, but why lock the door then? Jimmy looked at me like I was stupid. Maybe so we can sleep knowing that they can't get in?" I waved my hand around the room. "Okay, what if they're already inside and you just locked us in with them?" The thought clearly disturbed Jimmy, but he refused to unlock the door. At this point, I realized I was good, but not intoxicated than he was, so maybe I should listen to him. We did do our best to search the house before calling it a night. I woke up a couple times once I swore I heard crying coming from outside. Someone knocked on a few of the doors on our street. What really threw me off was the voice asking for help. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't even loud. I shouldn't have been able to hear it at all. If only I had been sober enough to think rationally. Morning came, and we got out of our tent. We decided to check out the far side of town. The Jeep's battery was dead again. It must have finally worn out. Jimmy pushed, while I popped the clutch. We drove across the town. I couldn't shake the feeling from the night before, like someone knew we were here and didn't like it. I checked out the bank. There wasn't even a single penny left behind. There was a newspaper with a headline about declining population and deposit forms scattered all over. The vault was standing open, empty as can be. After checking out a few more places, we noticed it was getting late. Neither of us talked about it, but we both didn't like the idea of sleeping in town again. The solution was easy. Take one of the hiking trails above the lake and spend the night camping. We parked at a poorly marked trailhead and took up our packs. It was pretty easy going, but Jimmy suddenly stopped. I nearly ran into him. "Yo, what's the big deal?" He pointed across the lake. "Listen, do you hear that?" A feminine voice drifted across the water. I couldn't make out the words, but the tune was similar to My Sailor Bold. It had a forlorn and depth to it. It was beautiful, enticing, and nearly hypnotic. Jimmy looked back at me, a big grin plastered on his face. "Bro, there's babes here." His excitement was contagious. I would love to meet the girl belonging to that voice. We started down a trail that, while overgrown, it looked like it went into the right direction. As we pushed through, Jimmy spotted a figure on the trail ahead. It turned at the sound of our approach. It was a girl in a white dress. Something made me hesitate. The hairs on the back of my neck pricked up. Jimmy had stopped as well. The girl raised a hand and waved in a welcoming manner. I couldn't tell you why, but I knew something wasn't right. The urge to back up started to build inside me, a sensation deep within me telling me to flee. It was almost to the point of causing me to run when Jimmy spoke. Be cool, bro. She's like 16, but maybe she's with some older friends? I think he misunderstood my trepidation, but it didn't matter. The girl was gone. The trail was completely empty. Wait, where did she? Jimmy trailed off. It wasn't like she could have just walked away. We would have heard it, and the trail was lined with impenetrable bushes on both sides. Jimmy shot me a nervous glance. We were both on edge now. There was something wrong with this place, and no amount of girls was worth sticking around. I told Jimmy as much. He reluctantly agreed to follow me back to the Jeep. Come on, man. It's not like you had a chance anyways. At least not while I'm around, that is. Jimmy snorted in mock offense. Excuse me, but you're wingman material. I'm main meat. A snarky retort died in my throat as a hyena-like laughter echoed across the hills. I could see the fear in Jimmy's eyes, and I'm sure he could see the same in mine. Okay, what the hell was that? He demanded. I looked around. It hadn't sounded super close, but I wasn't gonna take any chances. Let's get to the Jeep right now. I'm done with this place. Jimmy didn't need any convincing. We ran down the trail, made it halfway back when Jimmy screamed out, his voice laced with terror. Dude, run! I risked a glance over my shoulder. A few dozen yards behind Jimmy was a man in a full sprint. That was bad enough, but what really scared me was the realistic sheep's face mask he was wearing. I put on a burst of speed. I made it to the Jeep first and tried to start it. The neglected battery gave me a single lethargic turn, then died. Jimmy didn't bother with the Jeep. He ran right past, heading for town. Somehow, he still had enough breath to let out a scream as he passed me. I chased after. We gained a considerable distance on the crazy masked man, but he was still coming. Being the much faster runner, I managed to catch up to Jimmy. Suddenly, I had an idea. Quick, follow me. I dived under the wood porch of one of the main buildings in town. Jimmy crawled in next to me. It was cramped and dirty, but we were hidden. Jimmy quietly sobbed in terror. I tried to shush him, but he was beyond reason. The masked man had to be getting close by now. An off-tune whistle drifted through the air. Jimmy whimpered and shoved himself against me. He knows we're here, Jimmy hissed. I told him to shut up. He was going to give us away. Jimmy tried to squirm forwards. He was being too loud. I covered his mouth as the whistling got close. Jimmy tried to pull away, but I squeezed harder. There was footsteps above us. Jimmy was struggling as hard as he could to get away. The man was so close, I could smell the rotting stench of his mask. Finally, Jimmy stopped fighting me. Still, I held him tight. Fear filled my body. I felt a warmth run down my leg. The man was right above us. Dust was choking me. Jimmy lay totally still. I didn't want to, but I couldn't take the suspense anymore. I glanced up, and I screamed. I screamed so loud my voice broke. Peering down through the crack between the boards was the man's eye. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed. I begged and cried. Finally, I looked up again to see the man was gone. I sobbed in relief. He's gone, Jimmy. Let's get out of here. I started to scoot backwards, but Jimmy didn't follow. I pulled on his shirt. Dude, we need to leave while we can. Jimmy didn't budge. He didn't react at all. I crawled back up to him and rolled him over. I jerked back, slamming my head into the boards above. Jimmy's lifeless eyes stared up at me. They were wide with terror and with an unsaid accusation. I felt tears welling up. No, Jimmy. Come on, man, Jimmy. I dropped my head to his chest and cried. I tried to pull his body out. I really did. But he was so heavy, and darkness was falling. I can hear the distant laugh of the crazy man. I had no choice. There was nothing I could do. I left his body there. I ran to the Jeep. We had parked it on a hill just in case the battery died. I got it started and drove through town. I nearly collided with some dirty-looking bum wandering the street. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the welcome sign at the edge of town. The sign's so weathered, only a small portion survived. Population, 6. I drove well into the night. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't deserve to go to jail. Jimmy wouldn't have wanted me to go to jail. I didn't need to be rehabilitated, as what had happened was an accident. No, I needed a way to explain Jimmy's disappearance that didn't involve that town. Finding a canyon, I threw Jimmy's backpack off the edge. I drove to town and reported him missing. I told the sheriff I had fallen while hiking, and Jimmy went to get help. He never returned, and I made my own way back to the Jeep. I told them I waited until I ran out of water, but he never returned. The trauma on my face was enough to convince them. People searched for weeks. They found his belongings, and hope was renewed. After a few weeks, the searches slowed. Jimmy's family came out to search. By then, I had told the story so many times, the lies came easily. They hugged me and told me how sorry they were. It was almost enough to make me confess, but that wouldn't have done any good. Jimmy was gone, and this way, he died a hero's death trying to save a friend. Sometimes I wonder if I could have saved him from that place. Not saved his life, but if I had removed his body, would it have set his spirit free? I'll admit, there are times I'm tempted to try and find that town again, to retrieve my best friend's body and free him.